B'Av Hashem, we are learning Rosh Hashana Daf Chav Zayin. We left off on Daf Chav Zayin Amud Aleph on top of the Amid. The Gemara is going to begin to refer back to the Mishnah, to the case that in the Schweifer, in the Beis HaMikdash, says the Mishnah had its piv mitzupa zahav, which means that the mouth of the Schweifer was plated with gold. We're going to speak about the challenges we might have with it, and therefore we will better define the case and exactly where and how did they plate the Schweifer in the Beis HaMikdash with gold. We're going to be speaking about a very broader topic known as Terei Kala Loi Mishtame, which means that normally one cannot hear two voices, two sounds at the same time. Don't forget the Mishnah spoke about that in the Beis HaMikdash. They would blow the Schweifer together with the trumpets. How would you hear both of them at the same time? There's going to be some back and forth. There's going to be the concept that kiven the chaviv, when a person is very excited to hear something, when it's beloved to a person, then yohev date, then the person will pay better focus, more concentration, and veshama, and one will be able to hear a certain sound, even though normally the setting or the sounds might confuse him or her. We're going to review, we already quoted before, but we're going to learn again the Tosfos on Chav Zayin Amud Aleph that makes a reconciliation between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua in their argument as to when did God create the world. Was the world created in Tishrei? Was the world created in Nisan? We have the rule known as Elu v'Elu Divrei Elikim Chaim. These ones and these ones are both speaking the words of the living God. Well, when did God create the world? So he suggests something that we will chazer. We already quoted it above. And the new Mishnah on Daf Chav Zayin Amud Aleph is going to begin to enumerate various physical defects that will disqualify a shofar. And many of them are based on the principle that you have to hear the sound that's coming out of one shofar and not a sound that's coming out of two or three or more shofaris. The Mishnah will also speak about the kavana, the intent needed by the one who is listening to the soundings of the shofar. We're going to learn the Mishnah, but really tomorrow's daf will be a lot about what type of intent, what type of kavana is actually essential. We're going to learn so many interesting cases of a disqualified shofar. If the shofar was cracked, if the shofar is perforated, if the shofar was reversed, we'll see what that means. And if we'll have time, towards the end of the Amid, we're going to learn about a topic, two statements that were made either by Rabbah or by Rava. There are two versions, and they appear to be related, but they also appear to be contradictory. And this has everything to do with whether one can fulfill his or her obligation. The obligation is really on him by hearing only part of a sound. Like you're blowing a tkiya, what happens if you only heard the end part of it? Do you fulfill the obligation? Do you not fulfill the obligation? This will also be a topic that we will begin the daf with, and Chevra much more. So let's start on Daf Chav Zayin Amud Aleph all the way on top of the Amid. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam v'shar kol dvarim. All right, says in the Mishnah that upiv mitzupa zahav, that in the Beis HaMikdash, the shofir's mouth was plated with gold. How can that even be kosher? Did we not learn in a Braisa that if tzipohu zahav b'makim hanachas piv? Now I know the Braisa is not only speaking about the temple, but it's giving you a rule that if someone plated the shofar with gold on the location where you put your mouth to the shofar, then puzzle, then it's invalid. Why would the shofar be invalid? So I want you to know that most understand the invalidation is because since you are not blowing it directly from the shofar, your mouth is not on the shofar, your mouth is on the gold creates what we called a chatzitza, an interposition between you and the mitzvah, so it's not good. That's the way most understand it. And bekitzer, in brief, there's a problem with that. We learned in Sukkah, if you remember the whole topic about binding the lulav, Rabbi Yehuda holds you have to bind the three species together. Chachamim say you don't have to, but because of zekeli v'anveyu, to beautify the mitzvah. The question is, what material may you use? Problem is that when you're grabbing the lulav with the hadas and the arava, you're not grabbing onto the lulav if you are holding it over the material that you use to bind it. So we learned a rule. It's called kol lenei oisoi, anything that's put on an item to beautify it becomes bottle, becomes subservient to it, is ein choitzitz. So those who learn that the problem with covering the mouth or the narrow edge of the shofar, to plate it with gold, it's problematic because your mouth is not on the shofar. Why? You are golding it, you are gilding it to beautify it. And why don't we say that since the gold is there to beautify the shofar, it should not create a problem of a chatzitza? That's a big topic discussed. Just one approach. When do we say that if something is placed on an item to beautify it, it doesn't create a chatzitza, an interposition? That is if it's serving a function, like by the lulav. No, it's we bind the three species together. Either you're obligated or it's an inyan, so you have to bind it together. So now when you say, well, 1 second, if I'm going to put something to bind them together, now when I'm going to hold on to it, I'm not holding on to the lulav. There you say, no. It's beautifying it, it's not chaytzitz. There's no functional need to put gold on the shofar. It's only to beautify it. It's not serving a purpose. Here we don't say that since it's here to beautify it. Here we say it does create a chatzitza. That's one approach. It's only if you put the gold, sheloi b'makom anachas pev, it's only if you put the gold not where your mouth will rest, only then is it kosher. Today, God willing, we're going to learn another very important detail, and that is that if you put something on the shofar that will change the sound of the shofar, it's also a problem. So when the Braisa says that if you put the gold, shaloi b'makom anachas pev, it's kosher, it means it's so little gold, it doesn't make a difference in the sound. What's the problem? The problem is, guys, when you read the Mishnah, the word in the Mishnah is upiv mitzupa zav. So when you read the word upiv, it sounds like, piv means the mouth, but it sounds like all the way at the end, all the way at the narrow edge. It's mashma that you are putting it in the place where your lip is going. That's why we have a problem. So the Gemara says that upiv doesn't mean...
We have a problem with the whole horn being plated versus the mouthpiece only.
We are having a problem with you not placing your lips on the shofar proper.
The shofar proper was completely gold.
No, not completely. Just the edge, just the narrow edge, the place where you put it,
Okay, great.
So Abaya says that, you know what? When the Mishnah uses the word upiv, it doesn't mean all the way at the edge. And for those who are seeing the WhatsApp, it doesn't mean picture on the right, it means picture on the left. That's the case of the Mishnah. Upiv means near the mouth. In other words, when you would put the shofar in your mouth, the observer looking at you would see the gold coming out of your mouth, but your mouth or your lips are not on the gold proper. That must be the case of the Mishnah. Again, there's a novelty here. Even though the words upiv leads you to understand it's all the way by the edge, it doesn't mean all the way by the edge. Okay. And then the Mishnah continued that in the Beis HaMikdash, they also would place two people, one on the right side of the shofar blower, one on the left side of the shofar blower. Each one was holding on to a silver trumpet, ushtei chatzoitzres min hatzadim. And the Mishnah noch added, and when the soundings of the shofar was fulfilled, when the mitzvah was done, it wasn't just like we have today outside the Beis HaMikdash, a shofar blower. You would have three sounds. You would have the shofar blower, and both trumpeteers, if that's the word, they would be blowing the trumpets. But 1 second, what the Mishnah says, that the sound of the shofar was longer. Okay, now before we go into the sound of the shofar was longer, we're going to get to that in a moment. The mitzvah is not to hear sounds of the trumpets. We're going to see there are verses that indicate that in the Beis HaMikdash they would also blow trumpets, pseder, but you have to hear the sound of the shofar. If they blew these two sounds together, and you're good, is a charaya that a person, the listener who has an obligation to hear the koil shofar, there's no mitzvah to hear the koil chatzoitzroitz, is fulfilling the obligation. How can you do that? Can a person hear two sounds that are being omitted simultaneously? Okay. No, because what you hear, Yakir is asking why not. I'll tell you why not. Because, no, yes, no, I want to answer that. Because when you listen to music, what you are actually listening to is the sum total sound from all the sounds together, which is what makes it so beautiful. But if the mitzvah is only to hear violin, and there's violin, and there's a trumpet, and there's who knows what else playing, you're not hearing the violin. It's like when you're eating cholent. Are you eating meat or are you eating cholent? Now, what are you eating? All of the sounds get mingled together. You love it because you're hearing all of the sounds, but you're not hearing each sound separately. And the mitzvah is to hear the sound separately. And I'll tell you why. I can show you that normally a person cannot hear a sound when it's being played with other sounds. Okay? It's not that you don't hear any of it. You hear a mingling of sounds, but the mitzvah is not to hear a mingling of sounds. It's a gewaldige concept. I'll give you an example. When you have a minyan, how do we look at a minyan? We don't look at a minyan that there are 10 yechidim that happen to be together. A minyan is like a new mitzias. This is a tzibur. Yeah. And that's why our tefillas are answered. Because when God looks at us, then He doesn't see me. Then I can get into trouble. God sees a group. And God blesses the group. But mainly you get, by the Schweifer, it's not good enough. It's not to hear, since in the group there's the Schweifer, you're good. No, you have to hear the Schweifer. You didn't hear the Schweifer.
I don't want to be a nudnik, okay?
Yakir doesn't, but he's going to be a nudnik. But
you know that if I'm going to play guitar and I'm going to blow a trumpet, for instance, you're going to be able to differentiate which sound is which.
So the conclusion of the Gemara will be is that if they love guitar, and they focus on the guitar, they will be able to hear it. That will be the conclusion. But the Havamina is that you hear it's mixed all together. And how do I know that you can hear it? Regarding the way Hashem, God Almighty, records the Aseres HaDibros in the Torah. Ki Yadua, that it's written both in Parshas Yisro and it's written in Parshas Rosh Hashana. God only gave the Aseres HaDibros once. Really, God is giving it every moment because Hashem is above time. It's being given right now. But we experienced it then in Sinai. Now, when you put these two versions together, they don't match. If, for example, in Parshas Yisro, the commandment, the fourth commandment, which is Shabbos, begins Zocher es Yom HaShabbos Lekatshei. In Rosh Hashana it says Shomer es Yom HaShabbos. What did God say, Zocher or Shomer? So the Chazal say, no, both Zocher v'Shomer b'dibur echad nemru. The reason why Friday night we say Shomer v'Zocher, that's because we are also making the acronym of the name of the author. So you need to have the shin before the zayin. But really, anyway, Zocher v'Shomer. And the Braisa adds, and I want you to appreciate the miracle, because that's something without a miracle, a human mouth cannot pronounce two things at the same time. And even when God is pronouncing two things at the same time, without a miracle, the human ear, without an S, cannot hear. You don't hear them separately, you hear them commingled. So answers the Gemara, you're right. That's why the Mishnah says, Lokach ma'arich b'shofar. These are words in the Mishnah, that in the Beis HaMikdash, when they would blow, they began together. But then the trumpeters ended their trumpeteering. The one who's blowing the shofar continued the blowing of the shofar. Now, I don't want to get into push this in no time now, but just to be aware that this works by the tkiya. This is a lot more complicated by the other sounds, because the shvarim, the very short soundings, like how did it work? By the trua, every little ta ta ta, like, okay, but by the tkiya we see how it works. Oh, now that answer only fits, this is the topic that we are beginning, and we have to move, that will be the topic of the end if we'll get there. If this is the answer, you know what that implies? That if you are accepting that when the shofar and the trumpet is being blown together, you don't hear each one separately, you hear them together, which is not good. The reason why you're fulfilling a mitzvah is because you're hearing the end of the sound of the shofar. In other words, that's a bigger topic. Forget about the case of Chatzoitzres. Someone is blowing the shofar, you didn't hear the beginning of the tkiya, you only began to hear it at the end. Or there was some other reason why the beginning of the sound is disqualified. The end is okay. Are you yoitza or not? Now, the sound has to have a minimum length. It had, but you heard had the minimum length. But the guy who blew it blew something longer. Is it good or not? Based on this answer, you don't have to hear the whole thing. Because we are accepting the premise that the beginning of the sound with the trumpet is not clear enough for people to hear it separately. Why are you yoitze? Because you heard the end. And if that's true, so therefore logically we should also say, if you only heard the beginning without hearing the end, you should also be yoitze. If you don't have to hear the whole sound, it doesn't make a difference if you heard the end, if you heard the beginning. That's a problem. Why? Now look at this question. Why is that a problem? Because Tashema has a chayin. It says in the Mishnah, someone is blowing the sets of the shofar. Now let me just make it simple. You're blowing tkiya, teruah, tkiya. That's the way it used to be simple. You would blow 3 times tkiya, teruah, tkiya, malchiyas, tkiya, teruah, tkiya, zechroinus, tkiya, teruah, tkiya, shofars. So tkiya, Trua, Tkiya. After the last Tkiya of the first set, you are going to say the Tkiya right afterwards for the beginning of the second set. Those two Tkiyas are together. What happens if some Chacham says, why should I blow and make an interruption and blow again? My Tkiya is 4 seconds. 4 seconds, Trua. Then I'm going to blow an 8-second Tkiya. And the blower has B'kavana. Why am I blowing it double the length? Because I want the first half of it to be for the end of the first set and the second half for the beginning of the second set. So the Mishnah says, when it came to the second Tkiya, which is the end of the first set, he doubled its length. Says the Mishnah, Ein b'yodei ela achas. Oh, this is so geschmack. You know what Ein b'yodei ela achas means? Machloikes rishonim. There's one Rishon that says it's worth 0. Achas means the first one was good because you blew that the 4-second Tkiya. Most of the Rishonim learn that at least the double length Tkiya is good for the end of the first set. It's for sure not good for both. Why is it not good for both? If you don't have to hear more than part of the sound, so why don't we divide it into 2? Part of the sound was good for the end of the first set, and the other part is good for the beginning of the second set. It should fulfill, it should cover the obligation, it should be reckoned as if you made 2 sounds. So the Gemara says that's not a problem, that's not a kasha. Yes, you don't have to hear the whole sound. You can hear part of the sound. But if someone is blowing a Tkiya, to halachically say it's considered 2 sounds when you blew 1, that we can't do. This answers the Gemara Psuke Tkiyasa Mahadadi, but to go and separate them, that we can't do. Really, the underlying Havamina Maskana has to do is the main mitzvah on the blower is the main mitzvah on the listener. We'll speak this out. We're going to come back to this Mishnah later. Okay, another challenge. Tashima. In other words, how can you say that a person can fulfill their obligation by only hearing part of a sound? That's what we're saying. When it says in a Mishnah, we'll have this today. If a person is sounding the Schweifer, but he's blowing the Schweifer inside a pit, or inside a dus, a cistern, or inside a pitas, a large barrel. What's the problem? The problem is that sometimes a echo is created. So says the Mishnah, Im koil Schweifer shama, if you only heard the pure sound of the Schweifer, good, but if not only did you hear the Schweifer, you also heard the echo, the im koil havara shama, here's yakir, not only the echo, also the echo, you're not yoitza. And that was the problem. Amai, why should you not fulfill their obligation? Lepik b'tchilas tkir, mikamedila arvev kolam. The beginning of the sound, right, the echo comes after the sound was made. The beginning was just the Schweifer. A few seconds later comes the echo. If part of the sound is good enough, everyone should fulfill their obligation. This is based on the premise that until the echo comes, the sound of the unadulterated Tkiya was long enough. And we're leaving that premise. And because of this, the Gemara is going back. The Gemara is concluding, that's today, guys, we're going to have at the end of the daf different. Hearing part of the sound is not good. Now we got ourselves a problem. You're blowing it to Schweifer and the Chatzoitzreitz. So how are you, Yoitze, Ella, today? I guess he begins. Tarta kolam echad gavra. When does the Baraisa say that it was a miracle that we heard God's Zocher and Shomer? Without a miracle, we wouldn't have heard it. You know why? Because God was saying 2 words together. If 2 people are saying the same word at the same time, or making 2 sounds at the same time, which is not humanly possible, that is when a listener cannot hear them separate. Today, kolam echad gavra takoloi mishtame onanes. But if 2 sounds are coming mitei gravra, or Yakir's case, 2 people are playing 2 different instruments, one the chvesh is this, one that, then you could hear. Mishtame, you can hear each one. You can notice each one. So the Gemara says, no, it can't be. Can you hear 2 sounds that are coming from 2 people? We learned the following, but I said regarding the way the Torah is read in public nowadays. The way the Torah used to be read in public, nowadays and before. The Torah used to be read in public. First of all, there was no Bal Koira. You were called, you read. The Yasher Koyach that they gave you was either because you read or because you gave a pledge to Tzedakah. When you got called to the Torah. Then not everyone knew how to read. So not to shame the reader, There's a balkoida, but then the person who gets called up also reads. Okay, but the topic of this brisa is connected, but not the same. The topic of the brisa is that it used to be that the reader would read one pasuk, and there would be a designated interpreter that would interpret, that would say loud the meaning, the pasuk in Targum. They would read a verse in the Torah, someone else would interpret it.
What was that, in Bava?
That was in Bavel, that was in Eretz Yisrael, that was when most people began to speak Aramish. Oh, so imagine the Kriyas HaTorah today if they would do that. Oh my God. One reads and one interprets. But what happens if you want to have two people giving the interpretation? Now we're going to have the two people cannot say the Targum at the same time. Now the question is, why not? If you're telling me that if two voices are coming to you, but they're coming from two different people, you could distinguish Gesundheit, that two people read at the same time. So the Gemara answers, I'll tell you why. Because when people hear the reading of the Torah, they're not that excited, which is a tragedy, so they're not going to make the effort, because they hear this every Monday and Thursday and Shabbos. But if something is read only on occasion, fakert, we see that you could pay attention and hear one sound from a group of sounds. Halei Damia answers the Gemara Elul Seifa regarding Hallel. What happens if many people are saying the Hallel together? We just had this whole sugya. Today everyone reads the Hallel on their own. But it used to be that it was Shemea Koina. And it used to be that only the Bal Tefilla would read the Hallel. You remember that whole sugya that we had in Beitza, how they would read it, and how people would respond, Hallelujah, da-da-da-da-da, Hallelujah. But what happens if a few people want to be the readers? Mishnah says it's okay. Or when it comes to the Megillah, many people want to read it. So says the Mishnah, even if 10 people are reading it simultaneously, afilu asara koidim, then you who are not reading it, you're yoitze. Why? Hold on, maybe you heard a commingling of sounds. We don't say that. We say that you could pay attention. By Kriyas HaTorah, by the Targum, people didn't make that effort. It wasn't so chaviv on the people. Alma kiven the chaviv, when something is dear to the listener, yohev date, he pays attention. Hachinami kiven the chaviv yohav date v'shama. So in the Beis Hamikdash, they heard the entire sound of the Schweifer. Now the question is, so why did they have to lengthen the sound of the Schweifer? Elolom amarach b'Schweifer, guys, the first wide line answers the Gemara, not because until that point the sound was undiscernible. It was discernible. They lengthened the sound of the shofar. They extended it. To make it clear that even though in the Beis Hamikdash it was also sounded with trumpets, but the Iker mitzvah is shofar. Weiter. Then it says in the Mishnah, Ubetinius on fast days. Yes, let's move. It's late.
Were we discussing why there were trumpets?
Because in the Beis Hamikdash there's a pasuk that they always blew trumpets. Weiter. We're going to see. That's the pasuk. It's a pasuk. Ubetinius, the Mishnah says that on fast days, this is Tzvika made a good point yesterday. This is not Yom Kippur. The fast days that we have today, they didn't even have in the temple. It was a holiday, the Tisha B'Av and a Yud Zayin or Tes Tammuz v'chulei. It was whenever there was a communal tzara, every now and then, whenever the Beis Din felt, the community felt, the leadership felt, oh, this is not good, there's a drought, we'll see next Masechta, they would declare a fast day, and part of what they did during the fast day was they blew the trumpets everywhere. In the Beis Hamikdash, not only did they blow trumpets, but they added shofars. And the nuance, that there they used shel zacharim, this is all the Tanakama, that on fast days they would use ram horns, which are naturally bent, more bent than the relatively straight, remember that? Yoel, wild goat horn. And here, upiv mitzupa kesef, in the Beis Hamikdash, the shofar that was used by fast days had its mouth, not on the mouth, near the mouth, covered, plated with silver. Now, Mishnah Hassan the Zohav, Mishnah Hacha the Kesef, Farvas, why not gold? Why gold, silver? Iba, you say my answer number one, Kol kinufia. Kinufia means anytime you assemble people, whenever something was sounded, in order to assemble people, then we use silver. Where do we find that? We find that in Parshas Bahal Loischa, when God Almighty told Moshe Rabbeinu, Asei L'choshtei, Chatzoit Tzroitz, Pi Chasidus Chatzi Tzurois, Kesef. In other words, since the purpose of blowing the shofar on a fast day is to assemble the people for prayer, whenever you blow to assemble, not Rosh Hashana, you're blowing the mitzvahs to hear the shofar. But here you are, in order to assemble the people, you use silver, which makes a lot of sense because gold is gevura, gold separates. Silver is chesed. If you say now, when do we say the statement? When don't we say the statement? That's all the fun. But here we have a concept. HaTorah chasal mamonim shel Yisrael. Pashat HaRachmana is to have to make them, to use some gold and to plate it with gold. It's an unnecessary expense. Let's have Rachmanas on Yiddish Geld. Yeah? So what about the Rosh Hashana? Frektig about a house, some nami navi de kesef? So the Gemara answers no. That afilu hache kvoid yontiv adif. Now kvoid yontiv adif either means that you have competing values. And when you have competing values, you have to pick one of them. Kvoid yontiv trumps HaTorah chasa. Or, what did we learn in Beitza, Chevra? We learned that all of one's mezonos is designated for a person for the whole year already on Rosh Hashana. But chutz moitzas yomtiv. And that's part of moitzas yomtiv. The kvoid yomtiv means that if you're going to spend gold, you're going to get that gold back. So it's not that I lack rachmanas. I'm not taking anything from you. Rav Papa Bar Shmuel, who read the Mishnah. What does he read in the Mishnah? That when you have a Rosh Hashana, you blow Schweifer and trumpets. It was common that during fast days they would blow trumpets. But what does it say in the Mishnah? No, when it's a fast day, you blow trumpets with Schweifers. You know what he understood in the Mishnah? You don't only do this in the temple. Every time, it's like mitzvah min ha-mufchar. So Rav Papa Bar Shmuel savar le'me'evad uvda kemasnis, and he wanted to behave in his shul, as it says in the Mishnah, Amar lei Rava, no, you didn't understand pshat in the Mishnah, lo yamru ela b'migdash. And now, the Gemara quotes a Braisa that obviously Rav Papa didn't have access to, he didn't know that. And indeed, Tanya nami hachim, b'met varam amurim, both shofar and trumpets, and on a fast day, everyone did the trumpets, but in the Beis HaMikdash they also used the shofros. That's only in the temple. Aval b'gevulen, mean anywhere outside the Beis HaMikdash. Then, during fast days, again, next Masechta we'll see that was the common minig. Then ein shofar. And Makim Sheyei Shofar, which is on Rosh Hashana, ein chatzaitzrois. Another event where you see that Amoraim applied the Mishnah everywhere until they were notified it's only for the temple. V'chein hinig Rab Chalafta b'tzipoiri and Rab Chanina bar Teradyon b'sichni, that what? The way Rav Papa Bar Shmuel wanted. They actually, in their city, they blew both. Rosh Hashana was Schweifer and Chatzaitzritz. But, Sheba, the Bach adds the letter Hey. Hadavar, Eitzel Chachamim. You see, it wasn't clear in the beginning. Amru, they told these great Amoraim, Loi Hoyu, Noi Hagen Kain. They didn't violate anything. But that minig was only B'Sharei Mizrach on Temple Mount.
Why is it added for?
No, in other words, that's just in the Bach. No, he found the older version. If you know Digduk, Uchshaba, really, Alpi Digduk, there should be a Hey. But you can't make up your own changes without finding another text. The Bach found another old Gemara with it said a Hey, so he wrote, no, add a Hey. Omar, Ravam, Vitema, Rabbi Shoban Levi, that's what Danny asked before, Maikra. In other words, it's a double question. First of all, why did they use trumpets in the Beis HaMikdash? And number two, why only in the Beis HaMikdash? If there's a source to use both, then use both. And the answer is because it says in Tehillim, B'chatzoitzroitz v'koil shofar hariu lifnei hamelech Hashem. You know what we learned? Two things. That when you are lifnei hamelech Hashem, when you are in front of the king who is God, now, on one hand, we are always in front of the king who is God. On the other hand, godliness is concealed. The greatest gili is in the Beis HaMikdash. It means in the Beis HaMikdash. Then you do both. Lifnei melech Hashem hu debe'inon chatzoitzroitz and v'kol shofar. Both on Rosh Hashana and on fast days. Avol ba'alma loim. Then we had in the Mishnah, this is all the Tanach that he had this Gzeira Shava that juxtaposes Rosh Hashana to the blowing of the shofar on Yom Kippur, on the Yovel year, Shabbat Yovel Rosh Hashana, both Litkiya. What did we learn Litkiya? According to the Tanach, that the type of shofar ideally should be from a Yoel. And Ulabrachis means that what is the Nusach of Musaf of Rosh Hashana on the Yovel year? In the Beis HaMikdash, where they would blow the shofar was only blown in the Beis HaMikdash, mamish like the Musaf of Rosh Hashana, which means it's a 9 bracha shmoina esrei. You can't say shmoina esrei, which means 18. A 9 bracha amida, not 18, not always the 7 of Shabbos and Yom Tov. It was 9. Omar Shmuel by Yitzchak. He asked the question. Keman matzlina ha'ida. The nusach that we have today follows whose opinion? Now, what part of the nusach is he focusing on? When we say on every Rosh Hashana these words, Zeh hayoim tchilas masecha zikaron liyoim rishon. This is the anniversary day of the start of your handiwork, right? A remembrance of the first day. What does that mean? What's tchila? Now, I want to tell you something. You know how you can interpret tchila? The beginning of the din. You can say tchila means tchila ledin. If that would be the case, then when you daven on in the Beis Hamikdash Yovel Yom Kippur on Yovel, tchila would mean the beginning of real freedom when they go home. But he didn't say that. He says, "What's the meaning? This is the beginning of Masechah." He touched it the way we understand it. He says, that statement follows Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer is the one that says, "V'tishur nivra ha'olam." Which means that what? That Adam and Chava, Adam was created on the 6th day of creation, which is on Rosh Hashana. That's the meaning of Zeh Yom Tchilas Masech. Now, before we go on, I know we quoted this above, I just want to quickly read it inside Tosfos again. It's such an important Tosfos. Tosfos is saying, you're telling me that this only follows Rabbi Eliezer. We learned on Daf Yud Beis, remember Chachmei Yisrael, the rare times that the Gemara brings from Jewish Chachamim, from the non-Jewish sages, and the Gemara says, let the Kufa, we paskin seasons. Which season is the first season? We paskin like Rabbi Yeshua. So I don't understand. If we paskin letkufa ke Rabbi Yeshua, really the Gemara says we paskin like Rabbi Yeshua. So how can we say this? Because without our Gemara, I wouldn't have a kasha. Because if we would not interpret Zeh Hayom Tchilas Masecha to mean the way he's saying it means the beginning of your creation, the beginning of the judgment. Even Rabbi Yeshua holds the judgment is Tishrei, the judgment is not Nisan. But you're telling me that this is how? So we pass him like Rabbi Yeshua. So Rabbeinu Tam towards the end of Tosfos says, Omer Rabbeinu Tam the Elu ve'elu divrei Elikim Chaim. Ve'ikal meimar. One can say that the Betishrei Allah b'machshava libaris, that Hashem, it came into God's machshava to create the world. And you know what? What does tchilas masecha mean? It's gavaldik. Tchila, what do you mean tchila? Did you or did you not? You know what tchila means? The first stage of creation. You know what the first stage of creation was? Allah b'machshava. The Tishrei before Nisan is when it was Allah b'machshava. When did God actually create? Nisan. So we can paskin like Rabbi Yeshua on the Tkufa, because the actual creation was in Nisan, and we can still say these words even though we paskin like Rabbi Yeshua. No, that's the Rabbeinu Tam. The Gemara, Rab Shmuel by Yitzchak is linking it better with Rabbi Eliezer. He's saying, no, Tchilas Masecha means the actual creation. I must have Rabbeinu from our Mishnah where it says, Shava hayovel Rosh Hashana l'tkiyo l'brachos. Now, if you're going to say the exact same brachos, Zeh Yom Tchilas Masecha, according to this, if you want it to mean the creation of Adam, Adam was created on Echad B'Tishrei. Adam was not created on Yom Kippur. How can they say this? I know it's only once in 50 years, but so what? How would they say this bracha, this nusach, on Yom Kippur? Again, if without Rab Shmuel bar Yitzchak, I would say Zeh Hayom Tchilas Masecha means ledin. Then I would say that on Yovel, on Yom Kippur, it means lecherus, ledroir, to freedom. But you're telling me no, it means the creation. How does it work? So the Gemara says that, you know what, our Mishnah means that ula brachos, it doesn't mean that you copy and paste. You omit this statement. Ki katani in our Mishnah that the brachos are the same regarding all of the rest of the brachos, which is the ikir that you have not 7 brachos of Shemona Esrei, you have 9 brachos, v'chulei v'chulei, but this line you take out. Now there's another version of how this whole thing was presented. Rab Shisha b'rei Ravide Masni Hachi. That Amar Shmuel bar Yitzchak had the Tran. That what it says in our Mishnah. Shavo hayovel Rosh Hashana l'tkiyo l'brachas. According to the Tanach Kama, that cannot be according to Rabbi Eliezer. Because if our Mishnah would have followed Rabbi Eliezer, Even the Amar B'Tishrei Nivra Ha'olam, and therefore, according to Rabbi Eliezer, the meaning of the words Zeh Hayoim Tchilas Masecha Taka fits on Rosh Hashana. Ha'ika Zeh Tchilas Masecha Nishain the Rosh Hashana Isa B'Yovel Lesa. The fact that the Mishnah says that we copy and paste is that our Mishnah doesn't hold that you say Zeh Hayoim Tchilas Masecha on Rosh Hashana. So the Gemara says no. Kiktani Ashara. You do say it. Our Mishnah follows Rabbi Eliezer. You say the statement Zeh Hayoim Tchilas Masecha, and when the Mishnah says that the brachas are the same, it doesn't refer to the statement. So our Mishnah even follows Rabbi Eliezer. And again, the Rabbeinu Tam says that we can follow Rabbi Yehoshua, and we say Zeh Hayoim Tchilas Masecha on Echad B'Tishrei, because what we mean is that the world Allah b'machshava on Echad B'Tishrei, and the creation b'poil was on Nisan. Let's leave it at that. Weiter. A lot to cover. This Mishnah is going to begin the sugya, as we mentioned, of various defects, physical defects, that will disqualify the Schweifer. And if someone used such a Schweifer, then the soundings was not kosher, and you did not fulfill your obligation. Case number one. We're going to learn Mishnah Rashi. Every case is huge. Schweifer shenizdak. If a Schweifer was split, Rashi holds, Chevra, split means number one, in the length, number two, two sides, both sides, from the top to the bottom, completely opened. And then, Vidipka, you went ahead and you glued it together. Even though the glue is completely hidden, you don't see the glue. You put back the shoif, it looks the way it was, says the Mishnah Apostle. Look inside the last Rashi in the Omitted. This has a whole different understanding. We're learning Rashi. Because at the end of the day, once it completely, it cracked two sides, completely. Now you put it back together, you got yourself two shoifers. Now, for sure in the next case, according to Rashi, Dibeg Shivrei Shoifers, if you had different pieces of different shoifers that they cracked widthwise, so it was like rings, and you glued them together, which means when the sound goes out, it's going by what used to be one horn through another shofar. That's for sure a puzzle. Sometimes it's called zu ve'ein tzarich loimer zu. Sometimes Rabbeinu HaKadosh wrote two cases where the second case, once you know the first case, you don't even need to say the second case. That's the way, that's the Tosfos, that's the way Rashi must mean over here. In other words, the problem is that if for a moment the shofars were separated, you got yourself a problem of koil shofar and not koil shofrois. And that's for sure if you are taking pieces from different shofars and putting them together, you got yourself a few shofars. Even if you had the original same shofar. V'oid, it only cracked in the length, which means that from one side, the sound is going on one piece. Doesn't matter, but it's coming out by the fact that the shofar was glued together, two shofars. Weiter. Next. Daf Chav Zayin Amud Beis. Nikev usesamai. It was punctured, and you plugged the hole. What did you use to plug the hole? We'll see in the Brais and the Gemara. So the Mishnah says like this: if the seal, Chevra, hinders the blowing, let me learn it one way. There's a big machlekes how to learn it, which means that after you plugged it, the sound is not the same. That's the way we'll learn. Then, puzzle. Let me add a gewaldige nuance. The Yerushalmi writes that if a shofar has a hole, and even though the hole changed the sound of the shofar, you can use that shofar. Because the sound is coming out of one shofar. Before it got holed, before it got punctured, it sounded thicker, and now it sounds thinner. Who cares? But you went ahead and you fixed it, you plugged it. If the plug changed the sound, now it's coming out of the sound of the shofar and of the plug. Now, was the plug of the material of the shofar or not? The Mishnah does not differentiate. We'll get to that in the Gemara. But we're going to learn one mahalach. That the problem is that the plug changed the sound puzzle, and if you put a plug in there and the sound with the plug in, without the plug in is the same, our Mishnah says it's kosher. Weiter. We just quoted this before. Here the shofar itself is good, but the sound is shofar and echo. You are standing inside either a boit, a pit, or you're standing inside a dus, a cistern, or you're standing inside of a pitas, a large barrel, and the people are hearing the shofar. And the presumption will be that whoever's inside will hear the shofar. Whoever's outside will hear the shofar and the echo, not only the echo. But that's a problem. Im koil shofar shama, without any accompanying echo, yatsa. Im koil havara shama lo yatsa. And by the way, let's go further. Based on what we learned on Amud Aleph, we can argue that the koil havara here means only the echo. Because what we learned today on Amud Aleph, there's a lot. The subject is not closed yet. That if you really love, if you are excited about hearing something, you'll be able to focus on a sound. If you hear the echo, you're not yoitz. V'chein, the word v'chein means another invalidating circumstance. Not the specific detail. Another invalidating circumstances. A different topic. You happen to be walking behind the shul. Or your house is near the shul. And automatically, whatever happens in the shul, you hear without kavana intent. Now, the word kavana is a very broad word. We'll leave it for tomorrow to clarify what intent is needed. But there was some lack of intent. So says the Mishnah, and you ended up hearing the soundings of the Schweifer. And similarly, if you're walking behind the shul, if you live near the shul, and you hear the Megillah. If you're walking behind the shul, you're not going to hear the whole Megillah. But if you live next door, im kiven libay, only if you had kavanah. Again, the kavanah means you directed your attention. We'll leave that open, what that means. Then are you yatsa. But v'im lav lo yatsa. Afal pish zeh shama v'zeh shama. In other words, a person, both people heard the full-fledged soundings. You know who fulfilled the obligation? Only the one that had the type of concentration needed. Kiven liboy, then you're good. Zeh kiven liboy, that's why you're yatsa. V'zeh, since loy kiven liboy, even though the sound was the same, he heard the whole shofar, he will not fulfill his obligation. Okay, let's learn in the Gemara braises that elaborate and give new invalidating shofars. Tan Rabbanon oroich v'kitzroi. Not like the kudu, the longer the better. No, you want to have a little shofar. And you, naturally, the horn is very big, and you decided that you're gonna shorten it. And it doesn't make a difference, my friends, whether you shortened the wider top part, you cut that off, or whether you shortened the narrow part. Now, obviously, if you shortened the narrow part, then the hole will be bigger. You can manipulate it. You would warm it up, you would cook it, and then you can make the edge as tight as you need to make it in order for the soundings to come out properly. But you cut the height of the shofar kosher. You know why? Because when you blew, what did you hear? The sound of the shofar. One shofar. Similarly, if you not only changed it by its length, what happens if you change the thickness? L'mashal geirdoi. You scraped it. I don't care which side you went. Did you scrape the outside towards the inside, or you had some sort of implement that scraped the inside to the outside? And even if you made it so skinny that ve'emidoi al gildoi, you're down to the last thin layer, doesn't get skinnier. You know what? Kosher, the same logic. I know it's not the way it was on the animal, but what did you use? A shofar. What sound did you hear? The sound of one shofar. Suppose if you gilded it, if you decorated it by putting some gold, if it's b'makem anochas peh, if you put it mamish on the narrow edge, which means that the part that goes in your lips, the part that goes in your mouth, the shofar is not touching your mouth is touching the gold. Let's go with the pshat, that's called a chatzitza, then it's pasul. And let us add, we're learning this whole with the mahalach, that there's a big issue of you altering the sound. If it's and it doesn't alter the sound, then it's kosher. Another rule. Did
we mention before that we don't put gold because of the not to remind us of the Egel Azav? Where does that come in?
We're going to have that tomorrow, Tzvika. Very good. It's a big problem. And let me add something else. Oh, no. It's today. I'm sorry. So when I said in the beginning of today, Tzvika, I know the Sfasema speaks about it. The Mishnah doesn't say, the Braisa doesn't say what's the problem. So we keep on saying chatzitza. The problem with chatzitza is kol linei oisoi eino chaitzitz. So some other achrayim say the reason why we don't put gold is because ein kateger b'makam saneger. Now we also learned yesterday that ein kateger b'makam saneger is only mibachutz, only mibafnim, not mibachutz, and that's how they learned the pshat. That if it's on the part that goes into your mouth, then it's mamish mibafnim. If the gold is not in your mouth, it's keilu the kohen gadol wearing golden garments outside. There is that link here, very good with the Mishnah. Now another thing, tzipo zav mibafnim pasel. Even if it doesn't change the sound, by the way, which it will, if you gild the inside, that means the sound is not going on the Schweifer. Your coil and the sound that it's creating, it's going on the gold. That's not the sound of the Schweifer, that's the sound of gold. If mibachutz, if you gilded the outside, now what we already spoke this out before. The reason why the Braisa did not speak it out before is because if you put a little ring of gold right above where your mouth goes, it won't change the sound. Here we're speaking about someone who gilded the whole Schweifer. So here the Braisa has to speak out. Now the sound is coming from the Schweifer because you're blowing inside, not outside. But if that amount of gilding affected the way the sound sounds like, then it's puzzle. But the imlav kosher. Another din in the Braisa, this we had in the Mishnah. Nikav, if the Schweifer got punctured, and now usasama, you sealed it. Again, according to the Yerushalmi, you didn't need to seal it. Let it be. But you felt, it's punctured. You sealed it, now you got yourself a problem. Now here it's more elaborate. And as we'll see, there's a machlekes here and soon between two Tanoim, and we'll see which Tana does our Mishnah follow. Im ma'ake vesatkiya. The way we are interpreting this, ma'ake means if it hinders means if it changed the sound, puzzle. The imlav, if you put the seal in and now you restored it to the way it used to be, kosher. Let's go weiter. Nasan, okay, I'm sorry, what I quoted, there's a machlekes tanoim, it's going to be in the next piece. Nasan Schaefer b'teich Schaefer, imagine you put one Schaefer inside the other. Im koil pnimi shama, which means that the inner one, the narrow edge that you put your mouth on is on the inner one's edge. The inner one goes through. So you're blowing through the inner one, your sound only goes through the inner one. On the top, the inner one goes higher than the outer one. So it's only going through the inner one, then you're yotza. And let's add again, if the sound didn't change because it's inside the package of the outer one. But the im koil chitzin shama. But if you heard the sound of the outer one, and the way Tosfos writes here, a couple of lines under the Gemara, is because your mouth is on both. They end at the same place, so the sound is going in between two shofars. It's a sound created by two shofars. Then you're not yotz. Another detail, another Braisa. Tana Rabbanan Geirdoi, if you scraped the shofar, we had this case in the Mishnah. So I guess, whether you scraped it from the inside towards the outside, or whether you started to scrape it from the outside to the inside, it's kosher. You know how much kosher? Even if you scraped it so much that the hemidoi al means all you have left is the skinniest layer. If you would scrape it anymore, there'll be nothing left. And by the way, this changed the sound of the shofar, but it's still the shofar. It's the shofar. Kosher. If you put one shofar inside the other, we had this above. If all you hear, your mouth is on the inner one, the sound goes out of the inner one. The outer one doesn't change the sound, but the im koil chitzin shama, if the outer one somehow affects in any way, or especially the way Tosfos speaks out that your mouth the sound is coming out through both, then lo yotz. Another case, hafachai, if you reverse the shofar. Now, how can you reverse the shofar? Guys, when you put a shofar now in a boiling pot of water, don't do it in your house because it's going to smell for a month. But if you were to do that, it becomes very soft and you can manipulate it. So hafachai. Now there are two ways you can reverse a shofar. What the Mishnah, what the Braisa means here is dafka one of the two, and that is that what was naturally the narrow part, you made the wide part. What was naturally the wide part, you made the narrow part. That's the meaning. And v'taka boy lo yatsa, you're not yoytza. And indeed, amarav papa, the meaning of reversing the shofar does not mean lo tema da hafche kikituna. You know, when you have a shirt and you take it out and you want to forget your learning, take it out by taking it, by having it go upside down. It's something that we shouldn't do. But it doesn't mean, listen to this, guys, that you can boil the shofar and you can make the inner part the outer part and the outer part the inner part, but the narrow remains the narrow and the wide remains the wide. That is okay. The reversing it that's not okay is only if the katzir became the rachav and the rachav became the katzir. If you flipped it inside out, that's good. That's not the meaning of the Braisa. The Braisa is elo shehirchav v'sakatzir v'kitzir v'sarachav. And my tama, why is that not okay? Because the Rav Masna, regarding the soundings of the shofar on Yovel, the Torah says v'ha'avarta, which means you shall cause for the trua to pass. That's the literal meaning. Now the Torah could have written vitokata. There's a drush here. What does it mean you shall cause the trua to pass? The trua should pass in the manner it was carried on the head. Manner carried on the head means, by the way, the narrower part of the shofar is further away from the animal. You know that. On the head, the closer to the head, the wider. Leave the wide and the narrow. That's the meaning. That derech ha'avarasoi ba'inam. Again, the way the physical horn was carried on the head, the wide remains the wide, the narrow has to remain the narrow. But if you flipped it inside out, that does not bother us. Untitled. Dibik, shivrei, shofres, pasel. Right? That was the second case in the Mishnah. Second case in the Mishnah all the way in the bottom. That if you had many pieces from different shofres and you glue them all together, it's possible. Tanach Rabbanan, again, more details. Hoisev alav kol shehu. Not you build a shofar from many shofars. Chevra, you have a good shofar. It's working. You chacham, you decided you want it to be longer. So how did you make it longer? You appended to it. Verstehst, you added to it. I don't care whether you add it from the wider side, whether you add it from the narrow side. Bein b'minoi, bein shaloi b'minoi. Even if you use the shofar from a ram, says the Braisa Apostle Farvas, because what are you hearing? You are hearing a sound from two shofars. Next case. Now here is where we have a greater elaboration of the punctured case. Nikav, if your shofar became punctured and usasama and you plugged it up, Tanakama says, bein b'minoi, bein shaloi b'minoi, it's possible. Right, the Tanakama, my friends, does not mention at all whether it was ma'akev the tkiya, whether it's not ma'akev the tkiya. It's amazing. The way we are learning now the pshat in the Tanakama, as there is the first version, our Mishnah is not the Tanakama. It's Rab Nassan that says it depends. If it's b'minoi, then it's kosher. In other words, since you are hearing, since it's b'minoi, we'll get into the details in a moment, it's kosher. There's more details to it, because don't forget that our Mishnah wrote that it also cannot be ma'akev the tkiya. And the Gemara is going to say that's also what Rav Nassan is talking about. Number one, b'minoi. Shaloi b'minoi, if you use the material not from this shofar type, then b'chlal it's possible. And now, we go further. When Rav Nassan said b'minoi kasher, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, that's only if the hole that you plugged only covered the minority of the shofar. Why? Because he says like this. Let's go to all the details. Number one, this is a composite of all the halachas. You have to have the original sound. Number two, Yakir, even if you have the original sound, what did we just learn? That you can't make a sound from two shofars. So I got another problem. I don't care about that you got the original sound. It was a hole, and now you plugged it. The sound is coming from something else. Why isn't that two shofars? For that, Rav Nassan is saying bittul. Bittul means because it's nullified. For it to be nullified, you need two prerequisites. It has to be the same type. Number two, the hole didn't cover the roiv. bittul works, the minority is batel to the majority, not the other way around. That's the v'hushin shtay rubai. Infers the Gemara according to this version, Michlal, that if it shaloi b'minoi, afal pishin shtay rubai. Nevertheless, it's possible. It's very interesting. Remember, if you learned that the sugya of bittul is more min b'she'ena minoi in other contexts. Rabbi Yehuda holds min b'minoi is never batel. Here we're learning the opposite. For us not to be violating, you can't hear the sound of two shofars, and it's coming out of the plug also. You have to have, it does, not only is it not changing the sound, but the whole area is in the minority, and the material is a shofar material. Then you say it's batel, so it's only one shofar, and on top of that, make sure it's the same sound, not a new sound. There's another version. Other people learned that the statement of Rabbi Yochanan was on the second part of Rav Noson's statement. Schaefer. Rav Noson says, Shalom b'minei pasol. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. When does Rabbi Yochanan say that if the material of the plug is shaloi b'minei, it's only shenifchas rubai? It's only because the hole was more than what remained. Which means, my friends, Rabbi Yochanan is using the concept of bittul as we always use it. As long as the majority is the original Schweifer, the plug or the various plugs total, right? They are taking up less than the minority, only the minority. It's batel. Because all you need is bittul. And then, like we said in the Mishnah, not only do you need to have bittul, for you not to have two shofars, the original sound has to be the same. So if both of these things are met, then you're good. Michlal de b'minoi. Next case in the Braisa. Suppose of if you coated it with gold. If you coated it from the inside, it's possible. If you coated it from the outside, then we say it depends. If it changed the sound possible, notice, what do we see? That if gold is in the inside, what's gold? Gaiva. You're not good. If Beprimius, you're humble, Bechatzonius, you're gilded. If it changed you, it's also not good. But then you have less problematic. Nizdakla Arkai, if it was split towards its length. We're going to learn this the way Rashi learned the Mishnah. It completely got separated. Even though it's the same and you glued it together, puzzle. But L'Rachbai, if the majority of the circumference got cracked, so I guess if from the crack to the mouth, you have the minimum length of a shofar that we'll describe in a moment, even though it's cracked, it's kosher. Now this is very important because the sound is coming from what? Well, you have enough of a shofar, even though the sound is also going through the higher part. It's still there. You can't say it's two shofars. It just got cracked, even though roiv of the circumference. So everything is good. But if the crack which goes around the majority of the circumference, it's so close to your mouth that from your mouth to the crack you don't have the minimum height of a shofar, which means that you need to include the top part is considered disconnected. So it's not good. You don't even have a shofar. But here you don't even have one shofar. Now what's the shiur? What's the kama shiur tkiya? Shiur tkiya doesn't mean how long do you have to make the sound. It means how long does the shofar have to be? Perush rashbag. Look at the words perush. It should be what we will call one tefach. Remember this rule. A tefach is 4 fingers. Whenever Chazal speak about fingers, they are speaking about a thumb's width. 4 thumbs width is bigger than your other 4 fingers. The thumb is the thickest finger. So if you have something that is the thickness of 4 thumbs, it's going to be a little bit bigger than your closed fist. That's the tefach. Why a tefach? Because when you put the shofar in it, you will both see the narrow coming out of one end, the wide will come out of the other end, just a little bit, so no one will think that you're making the sound by blowing through your hand. Big machloek is whether this is a biblical obligation, whether this is a rabbinic obligation, but that's the shiur of a shofar. Weiter. If naturally the sounding is very thin, or if naturally the sounding is very thick, or naturally it's tzadod, it's hoarse, it's rough, kasher. Why? As long as it's natural, it's kosher. Says the Gemara Tzolcho Leilavu de Shmuel, they sent the following halacha to the father of Shmuel, that if they bored a hole through the Schweifer and then they used it, your yoitza. Question is, of course, why not? Every Schweifer has to have a hole bored in it. Guys, if you can see, imagine the picture that Kavan would have put up of the horn on the animal. Again, the narrow part is the farthest away from the animal. It's not holed, it's not holed, it's not hollowed. Every Schweifer, you have to make a hole through it. That's how the way you make it. It's not how you blow the soundings through it. Says Rav Ashi, no, the chiddush here is that when you remove the shofar from the head of the animal, there is what we call the zachrusay. There's like a bone that goes into the horn by the head. And you know how you can remove it off the head? By pulling out the shofar, leaving that bone on the head of the animal, and the white part is naturally hollowed. What happens if someone cut the horn of the animal in a way that they cut the zachrus, that bone that is inside of it, they cut it with the shofar? Now you have to bore it from both ends. That's the chiddush. It's also okay. We consider that all part of the shofar. No, it's considered part of the shofar, and therefore it's not a chatzitz. I know it's late, but we got to hop another few lines. So Amar Afuna lo yishanu that what? That we are concerned with the echo. You know when we are concerned with the echo? Only for the people who are standing outside the pit. Avaloisam that are standing inside the pit, even though they will hear the authentic sound. And Tanya Namihachi, it says lo yatsa, elalav shmamina, kidrafuna shmamina, and other people introduce this by pointing out the contradiction. In our Mishnah it says it says in a Braisa, yes, yatsa, so to reconcile, if you're standing outside, that's where you got yourself a problem. And let's go further the way we learned today, because you don't even hear the shofar itself, you only hear the echo, and people that are standing inside the board, you're yoitza. Let me just add, why are you yoitza? There's no echo in the board? Let's go to what we said today, that if chaviv, you want to hear the shofar, you'll hear the sound. The problem is that if you're outside of the pit, you only hear the echo, and that's why you're not yoitza. God willing, to be continued.